Cookies. So it's been interesting because for the last 2 or 3 years, especially like of course when GDPR came along, I try to kind of understand what it even means. Not only what do we need to do on our website, but actually where is it coming from, and like what do people do? And it really brought me to this really weird hole where I started digging and trying to understand what people do and how it works. And it was really weird and very confusing, and in many ways very, very annoying. And I want to kind of share a little bit of a story and some of the good ideas and some of the bad ideas. Frankly, I did not spend a lot of time researching for this particular part of the year. So most of this research is done last year, in the end of the last year, but I hope it's still useful. And the very first thing that I think we need to really keep in mind is that the world in which we're living as of today is a really strange one. I mean, we're probably all aware of that. Oh, I just need to remove some things. I keep getting notification from somebody. I'm sorry. Somebody's really trying to talk to me, I guess. But the world in which we're living is a little bit strange, to say the least. And this is the world, right? I mean, Leonie was speaking about it partly as well. This is the world where this has become normal. And when I was trying to understand how people perceive it and how people perceive cookie pop-ups in general, I realized quite quickly that the way of how we see it, like, you know, let's just dismiss it away and just continue to browsing, heavily depends on the country where you're coming from. And especially kind of boils down to simple overview like this. You know, this is the world in which we are, right? We have these pop-ups and models that are often dismissed, most of the time dismissed or blocked. We have push notifications that people don't want to sign up for, so they dismiss them unless they accidentally click OK. We have chat window pop-ups, the new appearance in the world of annoying things, which people tend to dismiss as well unless they need help. Feedback pop-ups, install app prompts, importing contacts. Everybody learned about LinkedIn fiasco. Nobody wants to spam their friends. Somebody wants to get your location, although you just entered the site for the first time. Well, that's probably not going to happen. And then very often when you ask people, so what do you do when when you have a cookie pop-up? They will say, oh, I'm just accepting it away and that's it. Right? Which is kind of interesting because when you look at all the other things, like somebody asks you to turn off an ad blocker, no, most of the time you're not doing that. Access to camera, photos, microphone, no. Video autoplay, people just scroll by if they need to. Very difficult to get proper email input from people. They're probably going to use a fake email address unless you explain why you need it. The same goes for sensitive data like gender, age, phone input. You know, capture, what can you do? You cry. I mean, you don't have proper capture. You have to track now the crosswalks and hydrants, fire hydrants and all of that. But there is no way out. And very similar to cookies, there is this two kind of connected things in people's minds. One of them is, you know, cookie pop-up, whatever. And the other one, whatever, I have nothing to hide. But it's changing, and it has been changing quite significantly after, of course, GDPR came into force. And Sarah had a really wonderful quote about this, saying that, whenever we think about all these little things, like a cookie here, a cookie there, most of the time we just don't see the impact of that, right? We just don't know what is going to happen to this data, who is going to use it. For example, you probably don't want your boss to find out that you're looking for another job before you found another job, right? Or if you're trying to propose or thinking of proposing to your partner and you've been looking for jewelry maybe recently, you don't want them to find out about that from your Google search results or from, or Instagram ads. And so cookies in many ways, are supposed to kind of protect us. But if you look in the data, that's not helping. So this is an article, this is a tweet that was published by Wolfie Crystal. He's been doing a lot of research on GDPR and cookie pop-ups and how they work. And essentially he was looking into the study, conducted a study on cookie banners. And so in August 2018, less than 5% of the 5,000 most popular websites in the European Union provided a visible choice to decline extensive data sharing, right? Which is not surprising. It was 2018. Is it better now? Well, according to him, it is not really much better. Sometimes you see this really horrible things which are just broken, when you almost see a third party being lauded and then nobody really knows what's happening. Surprisingly, this is a site that is all about cookies.org, and it has a very interesting cookie pop-up as well. But most of the time, as if even of today, you get this, right? Which is not GDPR compliant really. So what do you see here is, well, something that we all have seen, I guess. Obviously the cookie pop-up, but then you have a choice, which is kind of a pseudo choice really. So first of all, by clicking I accept or close on this banner or using our site, you consent to use the cookie, to the use of cookies unless you have disabled them. So actually, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you click I accept, or if you click close, or if you're just scrolling past through it on desktop. It's kind of, it's seen as a silent consent, but there is no such thing as a silent consent, especially in the world of GDPR. It has to be an explicit consent, right? And this is coming from the New York Times. And this is not really a choice. And the worst thing here is actually the fact that this clause is kind of misused, because most of the time when you ask people, they actually see it as dismissing a notification or dismissing something. But in reality, what how New York Times sees it is really as a consent, which it isn't, right? So you see a lot of those things happening. You see also this thing happening, which is just remarkable. So this is one of the German news websites at H, and obviously you have a choice. You can unselect all the cookies if you want to. Luckily for most of them, you can actually go ahead and explore how to unselect it, because some of them are activated by default and some of them are not. And there is no way to actually deactivate all of them at once, right? And the worst thing, if you go ahead and actually deactivate, it takes like a minute for these preferences to be saved. I mean, we've learned really well how to place a cookie and how to track somebody in, I don't know, nanoseconds or microseconds, but it takes almost a minute to save cookie preferences, disabling all the cookies. That's a little bit confusing, to say the least, right? But then you also, of course, still see this happening, especially if you're coming and you're looking at many like journalism websites in the US, where, you either pay or you accept cookies. That's not really a choice, is it? Right? So here you get a premium European Union subscription, or you can get actually access for free by setting the cookies, right? Now, if you look at most patterns, there was a pattern that actually disappeared quickly. One of them was that you would display a wall, essentially, right? Display a wall and say you either agree and then you proceed and you actually get to see the content, or you just walk away, right? And the reason why you don't see this anymore is because there was a precedent. In the Netherlands, DPA ruled that websites must allow people to refuse tracking cookies as well. So having a cookie pop-up like this is illegal now in the Netherlands, right? In the same way, you could see a lot of those things which are not really available anymore. I mean, you can have a choice here, right? You do have a choice. You can allow minimum cookies or you agree, right? Obviously, it's not really balanced here, but at least you have a choice, unlike in the previous example. But actually blocking the content of the page is illegal, according to Dutch law now, right? Another thing that's kind of interesting is that sometimes it's hidden away behind something like close, right? So very often you find this little consent notices just with a close button, very much like with a close icon. And very often it's against constitutes consent, which is not necessarily the case. And people get really confused about this. A newcomer in the design of cookie settings has been this one. Can you spot anything that's weird over here? Well, you have choice, right? You're supposed to have choice when it comes to cookie settings. And in fact, everything seems to be okay. So by default, only necessary cookies are selected, but statistics, comfort, and personalization are not, right? But the primary button here, the CTA, says select all and confirm. So once you click on it, all of them get selected and you confirm. But if you want to get only necessary, well, you have to find the link to confirm it, because the link is conveniently placed above it on the right, right? Now that's one of the dark patterns that's been showing up lately, right? And it's actually quite consistently used in many places like restaurant websites and something like booking hairdresser or things like that, right? So you find this kind of thing happening quite a bit as well, right? It's the same pattern here. Now there was another study And this study was, I think, conducted also in 2018, when cookie pop just started showing up, and it showed a quite remarkable difference in different countries. So the activity on what people do when they actually see a cookie pop up is very different from country to country. And especially because it was tested in Germany, they found a few really unusual things happening. First of all, it's not very clear at all that people just accept and walk away, right? Oh, sorry, accept and just start reading an article or whatever. They just dismiss it. People actually do think about it, and especially in Germany, it's very common for people not to click on accept right away. So this is a study on user action in relation to positions on screen when they actually see a cookie consent notice, right? There are different positions for the dialog top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left, and so on. And no action, which is the blue one, is actually dominating everywhere. So instead of just clicking it away and just enjoying the rest of the day by reading that article or using the site, people actually do not do anything. They just scroll past it, right? And that's it, right? Then you find actually not that many people accepting it, and even less people actually actively rejecting it, right? So it's not really obvious at all that all people just close, click it and submit, OK, and save, and that's it, right? Then they also tried very different wording and things like that, but everywhere where you could look, you'll find that no action is actually prevalent action on those cookies, right? Now, personally, I always block just because I want to explore how difficult they make my life when I want to not accept any cookies, right? But I did not expect that this would become, or it would be such a regular thing, right? Especially with track protection mechanism coming in browsers, it might be interesting to see what it's going to look like in a few years from now, right? But of course, on the bright side of things, there are also decent patterns where you can, make things a bit better for the customer. One of them is from gov.uk, or all the other web services that gov.uk and NHS are serving. Essentially, if you collect only necessary, only functional cookies, it's perfectly fine, as far as I understood it, at least, to provide a consent, to provide a notice here, because you don't use any other data than actually you need for the site to function, right? On the other side, if you go to NHS, you have a clear choice, right? At the top, you're okay with cookies, or you turn cookies off, right? And yes, you can adjust it granularly if you want. You can deactivate certain services, right? But it's a very balanced choice, right? And of course, for public services, this is probably going to be a pattern to use. And in fact, once you go and try to turn on the cookies, you actually have this control about what you want to do. Do you accept cookies that measure website use? And it's really well kind of explained and conveniently presented. So I think this is a really nice pattern to use as well, right? And sometimes it goes a little bit deeper than that. Here on imsedum.com, you have two options, approve and adjust cookie settings. You click on adjust cookie settings, and as it should be, functional cookies are set by default and the others are not, right? And then you have use default settings, which is actually these ones, right? And you're actually opting in for analytics cookies and setting advertisement, right? Cookies, which is probably not something that business would like, right? But this is a very fair and very honest way of dealing with this. Another pattern that showed up, which is kind of similar actually, is that you group cookies and allow people to select individually which ones they want to admit and what not. Because some people might have issues with Google, or some people might have issues with Facebook only, right? Or other third-party tools, right? So some services actually provide you with an opportunity to select which ones you would like to accept and which ones not, right? And also another pattern that showed up is this one with the slider, where you actually explain why you need particular settings or why you need particular data. So here in Envision, you can drag the slider vertically, and it's also accessible. And then for every single option, you can actually go in details and say, I want this, I don't want that cookie, or I don't want this cookie, right? It's very transparent. It also explains to customers what they're actually getting. And in many ways, it's kind of obvious, right? Actually quite similar to what you get in Finnair as well, where you have the slider, which kind of explains what each level of cookies, if you like, you want to accept and what it gives you and what it gives to the website, right? And probably the most obvious one really is the one from SourceForge. You accept, you do not accept, right? And if you do not accept, you can select what you don't want to accept and what you want to accept. And remember the examples I showed in the beginning where you actually have to opt in or opt out from every individual one. Well, here on SourceForge, you accept all or you reject all and you save and it's it. That's done, right? At least it's a balanced choice, right? But of course, once you have a balanced choice, it's really rare that somebody would go ahead and say, you know what? I'm really going to opt in for all the different cookies, including marketing and advertising and Google and all of that, right? It depends on what you're collecting at this point. And actually, one of the things that's been showing up, but I don't have an example for this, is the notion of gradual consent, where when somebody comes to the site, you only require necessary cookies, right? And once they installed some sort of relationship with your site, because maybe they created an account or anything of that kind, then you can actually start asking for more information. And so as you're building this relationship out with your customer, right, you're kind of asking for a little bit more. And because they trust you, you're kind of getting more consent. And in fact, it's probably a good idea to ask for consent for anything, be it cookie pop-up or permissions or notifications, only when you're certain that you're going to get a yes, right? And that could be one way forward as well. And this is the one that I actually wanted to show previously, where you actually can select individually which groups do you want. Do you want, for example, social media cookies or not, right? And I think that one of the better ways of dealing with this really is to allow people to select without having to go into settings, change settings. So this is one of the mockups by Matias. And the idea here is, if we have all these groups, why don't we just have radio buttons if we do show the cookie pop-up anyway? And you tap on it and then you can select and unselect without having to go into settings and adjusting things, right? Or the other option would be, if you want to go into more details, right? It could be also very similar like this, where you can group and cookies and kind of remove them when you need to in groups as well. And so all these findings and all these examples are collected also in this article that I wrote in April last year. So if you look into some things that actually seem to be working fairly well with the audience and things that didn't work well and things that are definitely great, shady area, then this could be the article to look at. So to sum up, many people feel that rejection is not really an option, but it doesn't mean that they're going to accept all the cookies, right? It is very common, especially among elderly people, and especially in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, that people will actually scroll by it and will not accept, right? Buttons are obviously more obvious than dismissing a notice, like with the close button or X, right? It's important to allow users to adjust privacy settings, not only when they see the cookie pop-up, but also in later. So this is why you see companies like Sing, for example, creating a privacy hub, where you can always go and see what has been selected, what preferences have been saved, and you can always adjust it. Grouping cookies in the categories is important. The default should be obviously only necessary cookies, right? But it's really a matter of explaining things. So if you really clearly explain that, we need advertising and this is our living and we need your support on this, then you're much more likely to get a response and get an okay than if you're using dark patterns, actually. Yeah, and allow customers to allow and reject all quickly, and the position of the cookie doesn't matter. You can put it on the top, at the bottom, it doesn't matter that much. This is just that thing that you place to block people from accessing the content on your site, and that's not a great thing to have, but that's essentially it, right? So with this in mind, I think personally, cookie prompts or cookie pop-ups, they did not help people in really being able to have full control about how much data is collected or not, because very often you're still forced into consent, whether you want it or not. I have to turn on my here, otherwise it's going to be blocked. So people are actually still forced into giving access to the data. But on the other hand, what I really value is the very simple fact that that pop-up really raised conversations and awareness about the privacy in general. And so people understand that data is collected, which is not necessarily something that I understood earlier. right? And they are maybe a bit more cautious. And especially in times where we see all the browsers even fighting against, tracking and all that, I think that this is a very valuable thing that we got as a result of GDPR. I mean, that thing isn't perfect, and I hope that this is going to be reviewed and maybe end up in a, as a browser setting at some point, which is a very political discussion to have. But frankly, I do think that this is a good thing in general. It's just up to us now to figure out how to make it more transparent and obvious and honest and fair to everyone who is coming to our wonderful websites and applications. So with this in mind, that's me on cookie consent prompts.